Hello, and in this jQuery tutorial we're just going to go over some of the basics of jQuery. So to start off with, I've just created a folder for our project. I've named mine YouTube, and essentially in here we're just going to have an index.html file, a style.css file, and we're also going to have a JavaScript folder which we'll talk about more in a minute. And that folder is just called JS, or you can call it whatever you like. You can call it JavaScript or JavaScripts, or whatever you like, whatever you want to call it. So let's just run over the HTML and CSS because I'm not sure if I've mentioned this yet, but I'm expecting you to have at least a basic knowledge of HTML and CSS and some knowledge of JavaScript before attempting to use this series. I mean, I guess if you want to go through the series without a knowledge of that, then, I mean, you could do, but you might not understand some of the stuff I'm talking about, and that's why I recommend having a prior knowledge of all that stuff. So let's just walk through the HTML. First of all, we have a doc type of HTML, which is the HTML5 doc type. Not that we're really using any HTML5 stuff in here, we're just using modern HTML. And then we have our HTML main element, and we have our head, and inside here we have a title. If this is a jQuery test, so that's the title of our page. We also link our style sheet using the link tag, and we set to style.css, which is the name of our style CSS file, obviously. And then we have a body section in which we have some filler text, which we've just put into some paragraph tags. So then let's just look through our style.css. This is just some very simple styling on the body. We've set the font family to Mario Pro, if not fallback on Helvetica, if not fallback on sans serif. We've set the background to DDD. We've set the text color to 000, which is black, and we've set the width to 500 pixels. And this width 500 pixels is simply so it makes it easier for me to record, and I don't have to flick all around the place with ScreenFlow stuff. So now let's look into our JS folder, and all I've got in here at the moment is jQuery 1.6.4.min.js, and this is simply the latest version of jQuery at my time of writing. So let's just go jQuery.com, and we can see all I've done here is I click download, and then I've just done a Control S or Command S or whatever operating system you're on, because I'm not sure if I mentioned this either, but you can code jQuery and JavaScript on any platform you like, as long as you have a text editor of some sort to write the JavaScript and write the jQuery, and you have a web browser to test the jQuery out. I mean, I guess you don't even really need a web browser to write jQuery, you just need it to actually test your creations. So I've just saved this at the current time of writing. 1.6.4 is the latest version, and we want this production version because we're just using it for using jQuery, and we don't actually want to have to edit jQuery in any way, so we don't need this bigger uncompressed code development version. So let's just go ahead and go to our file. So let's just, oops, here we go, we can go here. And at the moment it's just some simple text on a page. So let's go ahead and include jQuery. Now we can do this using the script tag, and we can set the source, which is src attribute, to JS, because that's what I've called my JavaScript folder, / whatever the name of your jQuery JS file is. So mine's jQuery 1.6.4.min.js. Some people just like calling their jQuery file jQuery.js, and some people like having their jQuery hosted on Google Code and linking the source to there, but for now we're just going to do it like this. Oops, I forgot, you have to do a / script for script, don't you? So now we have jQuery included on our page, and how do we actually test this out? So let's just reload our page. We can't see any immediate difference to our page. I mean, how do we test this out? Well, the easiest way to test it out is probably going to be actually coding some basic jQuery. And after all, this is a jQuery basics lesson, so that makes sense, right? Well, usually we'd create a separate JS file and put our jQuery in there, but since this is just the basics, we are going to just put some script tags in here and just write our jQuery in here, which is generally considered bad practice, but we're just learning, so it's fine, right? Well, to start off with pretty much anything you're going to do in jQuery, you're going to be using the jQuery keyword or the $sign. Now, the $sign, whenever you're using JavaScript libraries, well, most of the time, $sign is going to just relate to that library. So in this case, the $sign is equivalent to writing jQuery. So whenever we write the $sign, if you're using other JavaScript libraries that might conflict, so if you're using like MooTools and jQuery and they both happen to use the $, I don't know if MooTools does, I don't really use MooTools, then you might have some conflicts going on. So what you could do is you can either re-alias jQuery, or you can just write jQuery whenever we write $sign. It doesn't really matter. Some people swear by only writing jQuery, some people swear by only using $, or some other alias of jQuery. It just depends who you talk to, really. But I'm just going to use $, because it's quicker and easier, and it's pretty much what's used generally. So we're going to use $, and then we're going to use what's called a factory method. Now, before I go on, we're just going to talk about methods versus functions, because a lot of the time I don't differentiate between the two, and I feel I need to. So pretty much a method is, well, let's say what a function is first. That makes a lot more logical sense. So a function is just some kind of named piece of code that you can execute and pass it parameters if you want. So if we were to call a regular function, we'd type the function's name, and then if it had any parameters, we'd pass them in here, such as x, y, z, and then we'd do a semicolon to end the line. That's just the syntax of this language. So this method function stuff actually applies to any language you're going to learn. So that's a function. Now what a method is it's basically just a function that's applied onto an object. So if we had an object, then we just use dot most of the time. That's just the syntax of this language to perform a function or something, perform something on this object. So function dot method name, because this is now a method and not a function, technically speaking. So if I say method, that's what I mean, and if I get my terms mixed up, I'm very sorry. But anyway, yeah, so we have jQuery, we have this $, and now what we want to do is we want to use what's called a factory method to create a jQuery object. Now, essentially what this is it's just a simple method, so we're going to, in fact, technically speaking, I suppose, I would call it a function, giving the definition I've just given, because essentially it's a function named jQuery or named $, which is an alias for jQuery. And by the way, an alias just means like something else that means that. But then in here, we're going to just pass it a selector to select an element on the page, because a jQuery object is always just a set or one elements. A set of elements basically. So we can then give in single or double quotes, whatever takes your fancy. I personally like single quotes because they're, I don't have to then press shift and a key. I can just press that key. And in here we can use any kind of CSS selector or some other special selector stuff which we'll go over in future tutorials. So if you already know CSS, which you should do, then you should know how to select paragraphs. So let's just type P in here, and that's now going to select all paragraphs on the page and then make it into this jQuery object, which is the whole thing we've got here at the moment. So we've now selected all the paragraphs on the page and we have a jQuery object of them. Now we can perform methods on this object. So we can do this by using the dot operator, and then we can use one of the many jQuery methods. So for example, a good one is slide. Let's say slide in, and this doesn't take any parameters, or it can do without parameters. Now the thing is, well, first of all, slide in requires whatever you're targeting to not initially have any displays. So let's just go P, and let's set the display to none, which is going to mean they're invisible by default, all paragraphs on the page. So all paragraphs on the page, they don't display, so they're invisible by default, and then we use some jQuery and we say slide in, which is a cool little animation which makes the paragraph slide in to make the paragraphs slide in. Now this isn't actually going to work, so let's just go to a web browser and test this out by refreshing the page. You can see it's just kept on display none, and why this is because it's trying to execute this jQuery code before the DOM is loaded, before everything's ready. So what we have to do most of the time when we're using jQuery code is we have to check if everything's ready, check if the DOM is ready, and if you don't know what DOM is, Google it, before we actually execute our jQuery code. So we can do this by creating a jQuery object out of the document, and we do this just as we've done before. We use the factory method, or the factory function. So we write jQuery, and then we specify the document, and then we use .ready, which is just a method of any jQuery object, and then in here we pass it the function we wanted to execute, so we pass it a block. Now to do that we can just write function, and then we can have these empty brackets since we don't want it to take any parameters, and then in curly brackets we just obviously specify the function itself. So most of the time people drop this down like that. You don't usually have a space between these guys, which means it should probably not have a space there either. And then in here you can write what we want it to do when the DOM is ready. So in this case we can just copy our jQuery code that we just wrote a second ago. So when the document is ready, execute the following function, and that function is select every paragraph on the page and make that into a jQuery object, and then operate a method on this jQuery object and operate this slide in method, and we'll see what that looks like in a sec. So let's just save, and in fact let's see what it looks like right now. Let's just go to Safari, let's refresh, and let's see what we've done wrong. I think this S has to be a small s on slide in. Sorry, that's my mistake. Let's refresh. I know what it is. I know what it is. Slide in doesn't actually exist. When I said slide in, I meant slide down. I'm very, very sorry for any confusion I've caused. Slide down is the method, rather, not the function, that I've been trying to reference this whole time. And that's just going to make the paragraph slide down from the top of the page. So let's just refresh, and now it should work. Okay, you see that? The paragraph just slid down from the top of the page. And while we're here with the slide functions, we also have slide up. So if we just take this away from CSS and we change this to slide up, then when everything's ready, it should just slide the paragraph up. So let's refresh, and you can see the paragraph just slid up just like that, and it animated and it did all this awesome stuff very, very, very simply. Now obviously in this case you might want to just put this down to one line of code, because it is pretty damn simple. We're just doing this one thing, but most people like to drop it down like that. Because a lot of the time you're going to want to do quite a lot of things when the DOM is ready, and not just this one thing. Otherwise, is it really worth doing jQuery just to make all paragraphs slide up? Well, arguably it is, but some people would argue that it's not. So you're going to want to do other things, like you might do other selectors. You might want to do some other stuff. So pretty much, this is the basics of jQuery. Now, you'll see this document.ready line used quite a lot, and you'll also see whenever we pass functions to things, we use it done like this quite a lot as well. So, very, very simple. Just remember that we can use any selector from CSS by default. So if we want to select something with an ID, we could just use the hash, like in CSS, and specify the division name. And then we could provide some kind of method to do something on that. Or we could use some kind of event handler like .click, for example, which we're going to go over in a future tutorial. But this is just the very basics. So slide up and slide down, not slide in. Very sorry for that mistake. We can use slide up and slide down to very, very easily make things slide up or slide down, animate in or animate out, using jQuery. So if you don't understand anything in this tutorial, I'd recommend you rewatch it again, or do a bit of research if I've explained it badly. I hope I haven't. I'm very sorry if I have. But pretty much we use the jQuery factory method, we specify it with the selector, and then we do some kind of method on that object. So that's the end of this basics tutorial, and have a nice day.